Hello everyone and welcome to my Soap Twist 24 channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Eric Forrester had always been the unbreakable patriarch in the lavish corridors of Forrester Creations, where silk robes whispered secrets and diamond-encrusted sketches promised perpetual glory. Gripping the edge of his mahogany desk, his hands, which had been solid while they pinned fabric under the glow of design room lamps, suddenly trembled a little. He was a living legend at the age of 80-something, the man who used dreams and threads to create an empire. Ridge, his oldest son, was standing next to him. He was tall, moody, and had that distinctive Forrester intensity in his gaze. The world thought they were unbreakable. However, empires fall apart from within, and theirs was on the verge of collapsing in a tempest of avarice, treachery, and irreversible loss. The faithful COO and main legal counsel, Carter Walton, staged a covert coup months ago. He took ownership of the business from the Forresters by restructuring it into an LLC with Hope Logan's support. Ridge and Eric were marginalized, their voices muffled, their shares diminished. Carter had the documents and the power, despite Steffi's valiant efforts. Then came Daphne Rose, the mysterious Parisian perfumer with eyes that could see into people's souls and a smile like poison. Daphne entered Carter's world as a plant hired by Steffi, luring him away from Hope with whispers of doubt until he tore up the LLC paperwork and gave Forrester Creations back to Eric and Ridge. At first, victory tasted sweet. With champagne flowing and toasts to heritage, the family rejoiced in the mansion's opulent living room. With a voice full of fresh energy, Eric lifted his glass. Ridge gave him a pat on the back, Brooke grinned from the sidelines, and even Steffi gave him a rare smile. To the Forresters, this company is ours again, forever. With her part fulfilled and her reward hidden, Daphne stayed in the shadows. Heartbroken and filled with guilt, Carter quit and disappeared into the mist of Los Angeles. However, desperation creates monsters and liberation comes at a cost. Eric and Ridge planned not only reclaiming but also dominance during the quiet weeks that followed. One late night in Eric's study, Ridge murmured, "We can't let this happen again," as the fire crackled like their seething anger. With a bright mind despite his advanced age, Eric nodded and said, "The Logans, Carter. They think they can touch what's ours? We need to lock it down. Permanently." As they investigated the company's finances, they discovered layers of offshore accounts that Carter had utilized during the takeover, including Cayman-based shell companies, concealed deductions, and made-up expenses to support hope for the future's rebirth. It was cunning, almost unlawful. However, Eric spotted an opportunity rather than reporting it. "If we expose this cleanly, they'll drag us all down," he whispered. Ridge leaned in, his designer's accuracy darkening. "But if we redirect it," he said. "It was a deal sealed in bloodline conceit. We bury the evidence against them and build our own fortress. Shift profits, defer taxes, make Forrester untouchable. No more vulnerabilities." They engaged dubious accountants, transferred millions into personal trusts under the premise of international expansion funds, and engaged in massive tax avoidance by inflating expenses for fictitious European ateliers and deducting fictitious donations to charity. Ridge was in charge of the artistic aspect, creating fictitious invoices for fabrics. Eric wooed IRS contacts from decades past with his vintage charm, using luxury plane trips and invites to Forrester galas to purchase silence. Sensing the change, Daphne attempted to alert Carter. In the midst of the tumult, their fling had developed into something genuine, a brittle link. Her aroma lingered like a ghost as she met him in a dimly lit downtown bar. Still healing from the loss of Hope and his career, Carter shook his head and said, "They're not stopping at getting the company back, Carter. Eric and Ridge, they're poisoning it from the inside. I overheard them. Offshore accounts, cooked books. If the feds dig." Daphne refused to let go, saying, "Let them burn. They deserve it after what we did." Maybe she loved Carter, or maybe she liked the game too much. She gave a journalist and later a low-level IRS auditor anonymous information.
Sown seeds.
The fallout started off slowly. By the summer, a normal audit from the spring had evolved into a thorough examination. Boardroom rumors. Forrester Creations under federal scrutiny. The stock fell. Designers abandoned their jobs. Now marginalized, Hope boasted to Brooke in secret. Eric brushed it off as Logan sabotage, saying, "Karma's a bitch." "They're jealous," he said to Ridge while sipping scotch. "We'll ride it out." However, the noose became more tight. Agents raided the mansion in September. Eric was hosting a family dinner, and the driveway was lined with black SUVs. They barged in with flashing badges as Ridge was drawing in his office. "Eric Forrester, Ridge Forrester, you're under arrest for tax evasion, wire fraud, and conspiracy to defraud the United States government." The entire family was horrified. As the handcuffs clicked on her grandfather's wrists, Steffi let out a scream. Brooke sobbed as she fell into a chair. Thomas struck a wall. Ever the stoic, Eric looked directly into Ridge's eyes. Jail was a terrible mirror. Ridge, shackled next to him, murmured back, "Legacy? Dad, we're done. We did this for the legacy, son." Now wearing an orange jumpsuit, Eric, the honey bear who delighted generations, is imprisoned alongside regular crooks. The cold made his arthritis flare up. The worst times were at night, when regrets came pouring in. His rock, Stephanie, had long since passed away. How she would have laughed at this stupidity. Ridge did worse. "You built beauty, Eric," her spirit seemed to say, "and destroyed it with greed." After a fight with a prisoner who recognized him from tabloids, "Hey, pretty boy designer," he crumbled and was sent in solitary. He replayed his life while staring at gray walls, marriages to Brooke and Taylor, dispersed children. All for what? A business now in ruins. Once, through glass, Daphne came to visit. "I tried to stop it," she continued, her flawless makeup streaked with tears. "The trial was a spectacle. Carter's gone. Hope's destroyed. This isn't winning." They were portrayed by prosecutors as spoiled elitists who avoided paying millions while workers barely made ends meet. Emails, falsified documents, and Daphne's recorded tips used against them in a plea deal were among the many pieces of evidence that surfaced. Her voice broke as she testified. Subpoenaed, Carter declined to boast, saying, "They were desperate to reclaim what was taken." But desperation turned to destruction. As he sat in the back, he observed the men who had once served as his mentors fall apart. Hope was by his side, clutching his hand, for solace or victory, who knew? Eric, weak but unflinching, took the stand. "The jury rejected the claim that Forrester Creations is my life. I protected it the only way I knew how. I'm guilty of everything." 20 years, Eric. Ridge, 15. Hope faded like old fashion, but appeals were still waiting. The most depressing aspect? The fall of the empire. Steffi attempted to keep everything together while Eric and Ridge were incarcerated, but creditors kept coming back. The business declared bankruptcy. Gowns were auctioned off. The mansion went into foreclosure. Brooke whispered to pictures as she strolled through deserted hallways. With Finn gone, Steffi drank by herself, unable to handle the controversy. Haunted by her involvement, Daphne vanished to Paris. Hope and Carter? They were discreetly wedded, but their happiness was empty. One evening, Hope remarked, "We won," while gazing at a Forrester label on an item she had found at a thrift store. Years went by. But at what cost? Eric had a silent heart attack and passed while in prison. There will be no elaborate funeral, just grieving family members. Ridge appeared as a ghost after being granted early parole for good behavior. Broken and gray-haired, he went to the Forrester building that had been abandoned. Drafting tables are dusty. He traced a drawing of his final, incomplete design. He whispered, "I thought we were invincible," to the empty room. Ink was smudged by tears. Once daring and exquisite, the Forrester legacy was reduced to rubble. Their demise had been orchestrated by greed, but it was sealed by loss, the painful, unending kind. Ultimately, Daphne and Carter's Forrester remained unoccupied. Nothing remained to be taken. Just reminders of the past and the unfortunate reality that some civilizations built on falsehoods are not destined to endure. The world of fashion went on. There were new designers. However, rumors about the powerful Forestas, fathers and sons who went too far, fell too hard, and lost all in the quest for power, persisted in Los Angeles. In a little apartment paid for out of sympathy, Brooke paid Ridge one final visit. She questioned, was it worth it? His eyes were hollow as he gazed at her. She walked away without kissing him, saying, "No. God, no." Like the last stitch in a ripped seam, the door closed quietly. Ridge sobbed in the quiet for the life that vanished like sand between well-groomed fingertips, the family he wrecked, and the father he followed into the abyss. Not all tragedies are loud. Sometimes it's the silent disintegration of dreams, piece by piece, until regret is all that's left. In storage, Eric's portrait hung crookedly, collecting dust. In a box, Ridge's drawings turned yellow. The scent of Daphne vanished from the shelves. The triumph of Carter and hope sounded hollow. The conspiracy to recover a throne resulted in chains, and the story ended with a whimper rather than a bang. It was a tragic, unique tale of arrogance. They became a cautionary story in the annals of Los Angeles high society. Touch the sun and burn. Indefinitely. Like a secret whispered too late, the morning light swept across Los Angeles. Eric sat at the mahogany table in the opulent Forrester estate, his hands shaking as he raised a long cold cup of coffee. There was a heavy hush. Time itself appeared to be terrified of what would happen next, as even the clock's ticking seemed to pause. With his tie thrown off, Ridge walked into the room, his eyes restless with the insomnia of a man plagued by failed plans. Eric didn't glance up when Ridge added, "Dad," in a quiet but frantic voice. "They know." "They know, of course," he answered. There was a long pause until someone said, "You can only hide numbers for so long before they start counting themselves." Ridge wanted to say anything, perhaps an apology or a confession that he had gone too far, but the words never came to him. Rather, the faraway sirens became closer and louder until they screamed through the silent streets and settled like a curse outside the Forrester estate's gates. The doorbell rang once, coldly and sharply. Eric stood slowly, no longer haughty, but with broad shoulders. He said, "So this is it. It ends with a knock at the door after everything we've built, Ridge, after all the love, all the betrayal, all the power." Ridge tried to stop him, but the door opened before they could do anything. With their badges shining like judgment itself, 2 federal agents entered. "Forrester, Eric." "Forrester, Ridge." The words hit the room with the weight of a lifetime. "You are under arrest for tax evasion and conspiracy to commit corporate fraud." By the time Eric's handcuffs were tightened around his wrists, the sunshine had changed and was peeking through the curtains. Standing next to him, Ridge appeared stubborn but was actually falling apart. The house that had formerly held fashion shows, romantic relationships, and aspirations to leave a lasting legacy stood motionless as they were escorted out. An incomplete sketch, which Ridge had claimed would redefine the Forrester name, lay ripped on the marble floor. It was simply one more failed promise. Daphne was sitting in her studio across town at the same moment, surrounded by paper drawings and bolts of silk. She had no idea that everything was going to change. Carter came in quietly, a look of anxiety that she had never seen on his normally composed face. His voice broke as he said, "They've been arrested." Daphne froze. "Who?" "Eric and Ridge." Her pencil fell on the ground. She had worked for years to establish herself as a designer in a family-run company that valued excellence and pride. Ridge had been the storm she could never escape, but Eric had always been the patriarch, the guy whose favor she desired. They had both once told her that family was everything, but she was beginning to realize that it could also be a prison. Carter saw the understanding set in like frost as her eyes glazed over. Silently, he went on, "They were planning to take over our side of the company." "So it's true," Daphne muttered. The accounts were already being transferred when the IRS caught them. Carter held her hand, but it was too shaky to grip. They wanted to erase us. I don't think they truly intended to harm you, Daphne. Since the numbers began to plummet, Eric has been in a precarious situation. Daphne shook her head, saying, Ridge just followed him. They always use the Forrester name. However, who follows the people they demolish? Eric and Ridge sat opposite each other at the prison facility that night, their faces devoid of color due to their light orange uniforms. They could hardly hear the other inmates, sounds reverberating down the hallway. Eric bent over. He declared, We didn't do this out of greed. We were losing everything, so we did it. The business was collapsing. Ridge gazed at the table and said, You know how quickly the industry moves. One bad season, one scandal, and we're nothing. Eric's jaw tightened as he thought, maybe being nothing would have been better than this. Avoid saying that. Do you believe that I desired this? Do you believe that I wanted to commit a crime and terminate my life? Ridge remarked in a low, weary voice, I think you wanted to control everything, even when it was already slipping away. You couldn't bear to see Daphne get up. Eric remained silent for a considerable amount of time. You couldn't stand watching Carter take the spotlight that used to be yours. Then he gave a hesitant, almost surrendering nod. Perhaps you're correct. Perhaps I was unable to let go. The Forrester name has a significance in the past. Back at the corporation, Daphne had to deal with the media by herself. Now it's just headlines. Reporters threw questions while cameras flashed like lightning. Her posture was flawless as she stood behind the podium, her eyes dry but full of all the things she was unable to express. She firmly stated, Forrester Creations will continue its operations. We'll work closely with the authorities. However, she felt empty on the inside. The actions of two individuals do not define the spirit of this company. There was betrayal in every syllable. She recalled the times when Eric would gently grin as he entered the design room, complimenting her patterns and assuring her that the future was hers. She recalled Ridge telling her that she was powerful, visionary, and unstoppable, just like her mother. And now all she had constructed was on the verge of being destroyed by those same guys. When she got home that evening, Carter was standing at the window. His face was illuminated by the city lights, which mirrored his weariness from seeing everything fall apart. He said, They offered me a deal. Daphne glanced up sharply.
A deal?
Her heart wrenched as she said, They'll let me keep my shares if I testify about what Ridge and Eric planned, how they tried to move company assets under false accounts. And if you don't, they'll take everything. For a brief moment, the air between them was thick with decisions, love or truth, loyalty or life. Daphne inhaled deeply. Silently, she whispered, Do what you have to do. I don't want to lose you too, she said, but she was aware that regardless of Carter's decision, she had already lost the conviction that love, family, and work could all coexist without betrayal. Weeks went by. The courtroom turned into a stage where all secrets were revealed under dazzling lights as the trial got underway. Ridge fidgeted next to Eric, his confidence waning with every charge read out loud, but Eric sat motionless, his face a mask of dignity. The world seemed to stop as Daphne took the stand. She spoke honestly and calmly, but with a tremble that revealed the underlying anguish. The unusual late-night meetings, the vanishing money, and the emails she hadn't wanted to accept were real were all things she disclosed to the court. Ridge was unable to look her in the eyes when she was done. Rain started to pour outside, first lightly and then steadily, clearing the courtroom steps of anything but memories. Eric received a 5-year term at the conclusion of the trial. Ridge was given 3. After collaborating, Carter was cleared, but the remorse he felt for doing so would last longer than any punishment. Daphne was not present at the sentencing.
She was unable to.
Rather, she headed to the silent, shuttered old Forrester estate, where laughing once was dust accumulated. She moved down the corridors, feeling the walls as if they may still be warm. She discovered a note neatly folded on the desk in Eric's study. She was the intended recipient. It started, My dearest Daphne, if you're reading this, it indicates that I've finally failed at the one thing I made a self-promise to never fail, keeping this family safe. I believed that by maintaining power and breaking the rules, I might save us. However, all I did was destroy the people I care about. You were destined to be a leader. I apologize for attempting to prevent you from fulfilling your own destiny.
Eric.
Silently, her tears spilled down the page. She was unsure whether to lament him or to despise him. Perhaps both. The ensuing months were gloomy and slow. One sketch at a time, Daphne rebuilt the business. With fresh collections, new designers, and an emphasis on integrity and craftsmanship, she transformed the controversy into a tale of rebirth. It was dubbed the Forrester redemption line by the media, but it was just survival for her. Carter stayed at her side, although occasionally the shadow of his actions separated them. He abruptly stopped one evening when they were strolling along the beach close to Malibu. He whispered, "I keep seeing Ridge." In my mind. Daphne turned to face the horizon, where the sea met the last of the light. I keep hearing him say, "I betrayed the family." "Perhaps you did," she responded softly. He nodded, tears starting to form but not falling. "But maybe that's what it took to save what was left. Will they ever be able to forgive us?" She remained silent. Like memories, the waves smashed, fleeing and coming again. Eric's outstanding behavior earned him an early release 2 years later. The edges of his pride had worn down to something brittle and human, and he was quieter and thinner. No one spoke when he re-entered the company. The quiet was heavy with the past. He was in the main office when Daphne met him. The man who created everything and the woman who had to protect it from him just stared at one another for a considerable amount of time. At last he said, "I saw the new line." "It's lovely." "Thank you," she said quietly. He surveyed the space, admiring the textiles, the drawings, and the subdued buzz of production. Daphne shook her head, saying, "You did what I couldn't."
No.
There was only sadness between them, the type that results from recognizing that love can destroy as easily as it builds. "I just learned from what you did." Eric went back to the mansion by himself that evening. There were less echoes and the home appeared smaller. He went to his studio, sat down at his old drafting table, and started drawing a recollection of Daphne as a toddler, standing in the workshop and gazing up at him with awe rather than a fashion design. Eric was still there when the sun came up the following morning, his hand still on the page and the sketch incomplete. He was softly framed by the window light, which seemed to finally forgive him. Ridge stood next to Daphne at his funeral, both of them silent and transformed. There were no cameras or reporters present during the private service, just the hushed weeping of people who had formerly referred to him as a father, mentor, and imperfect genius. When everyone had departed, Daphne stayed and gently touched the gravestone. She said, "I forgave you a long time ago." With red eyes, Ridge walked next to her and said, "I just wish you'd lived long enough to forgive yourself. You know he loved you." "I know," she replied. That was the issue. As they stayed there till the sun set, the atmosphere between them felt serene for the first time in years. It wasn't healed, but it was also no longer painful. Forrester Creations began a new chapter in the months that followed. The business prospered from authenticity rather than scandal or legacy. Daphne's design started to convey tales of grief, forgiveness, and redemption rather than opulence or power. Each stitch had a lesson, and each thread held a memory. Ridge, now calmer and more modest, paid occasional visits. He never asked for more, and only offered assistance when he could. He discovered Daphne working late one afternoon, sketching beneath a pool of golden light. "Do you ever give him any thought?" he inquired. "Every day," she replied. He gave a slight smile. "Then he's still here." She glanced up at him, and for a few seconds, she saw the brother she had always wanted him to be instead of the guy who had deceived her. The world continued to revolve.